continue recording. Okay, there we go. All right, where were we? So there's a document in LoudCloud, and that's the sym400 SQL triggers document. And these are the specifics in that document. Basically, you're going to create a trigger that will fire when something happens to the person-by-person table. And basically, you need to amend or modify the document and make sure that you're using the correct table. And I will go over that here in a second as to what I mean, and then apply the trigger. And essentially, the way you apply a trigger, you don't actually execute it or anything like that. You change something in the table, and the trigger will fire. And I'll show you what that means here. All right, so some of the things that you're going to do as far as the changes in that table, you're going to add a title to Ken Sanchez. Basically, you're going to add Mr. You're going to add a middle name to Timothy Michael Rahim. You're going to add a title, missed, and change the middle. Whoops. Yeah, make sure your mics are muted so we don't get a lot of feedback or echo. Unless you're using a headset. If you're using a headset, then that will work better, like Tim. So you're going to change the middle name, or add a title and change the middle name of Heather to Heather for Samantha H. Smith. You're going to add the title Mrs. and change the last name Thompson to Laura K. Penor. Okay, so those are the actions that you're going to perform. And for this assignment, I need to see all of these queries that you create for these changes, and you should essentially know how to do those. There's a total of 6 changes that you're going to make in the database that should cause the trigger to fire. And basically on Thursday, if you have any questions about how to change, hopefully you haven't forgotten about how to change data in a record in a table, then I can answer those questions. And here is the actual code this is the outline code for the trigger. The syntax for a trigger is create trigger. And this is another sub-program in SQL Server. And then you give the trigger a name. And our trigger name is going to be trigger TRG update columns. And you notice there's some blanks here, which you need to fill in accordingly. And to continue with the syntax is on, and then there's specific items that go into the square brackets there for update so you have on, and then a particular object, and then for update is the type of trigger. And the for update, you can have for insert, for delete, you can have for select, but that's kind of a ridiculous trigger. But generally it's DDL statements or the change DML statements, meaning that it's usually associated with an update or an insert for triggers. So and then set no count on, and don't worry too much about that. All that does is ensure that you don't have a count, or ensure that you do have a count. I don't know if you're paying attention. If you go to your messages in the SQL Server Management Studio, it'll tell you the number of rows affected. That's your row. That's your no count. So you set it to on. Set no count to on. This is a little confusing, but don't worry about it. It's just something that you can change on and off. And you can, if you're adventurous enough, you can fool around with that a little bit. But it's just something that you would normally have in a trigger, especially if you're trying to, in the real world, affect many, many records. Okay, then you declare variables. You should know all about this. Actually, we're declaring a counter and then other types of variables in our trigger. And basically, we do that because we want to use the values or the literal values of this particular trigger to make changes. So you should know all about the declare and the set, and even this ordinal position. Basically, just to explain that briefly, you're setting a position and creating an order of that primary key. And kind of a resultant, we'll call it a resultant table at this point, but don't let that confuse you. This part is just declaring a method for us to capture how the trigger is ran, or how the trigger is fired, excuse me, that's the correct verbiage. So then you set this variable num columns equal to this, and this should not be surprising. Select count, which is just a function from information schema columns. Now that particular, the one in light green, is essentially an internal subprogram that you can call from SQL Server. And basically we're going to pull out the table name, the schema and the table name that we're changing to make sure we can list that in our result table. So all we're doing now, whenever we change information on this table, which is the object here, and I'll point out what that is, then it's going to write information from this information schema columns, which is basically a special table in the system. So that's what this is, this whole information schema column. Oops, arrows on that. These arrows are essentially pointing out the places when you begin to build this query where you actually have to add information. And this should make some sense here. If you look at this, how this is listed here, you have, okay, this is a schema and this is a table, and then this is schema table according. So just keep that in mind. And then the second half of the code, this is all one trigger. I just had to separate it into two slides so you can see. So you're setting a loop, basically I equals 1, and while I is less than or equal to the number of columns in that table, then you're going to do this. And basically, it's going to go through all the records, and it's going to check to see if there's anything that has changed in that table. And if it is, it's going to pull out that column and then basically list it in this special resultant table, and then the last part of the code. So there are actually 3 sections of the code here. I apologize. And then the last part is basically, it's going to select this table. This is all in the trigger, where it'll select the date and it'll select the column, the schema and the columns that were changed with the trigger from that table. And it's going to, and the order by this ordinal position is basically, it'll tell you exactly what record or what column was changed in the table. So all that being said, all this trigger is going to do is going to capture the column, the date, and the column, including the schema that were changed, that were updated when in that person-by-person table. Now, does that make sense? That's a lot said, but any questions about that? And we'll go over that more on Thursday. Any questions?
Nope.
Does that make sense? It's relatively straightforward, since some of the confusing parts of the trigger itself is this information schema. That's just another system table. And then get date, is just your system date on this last part. All of this is just a while and an if loop. It means it's going to loop through all the columns, or basically all the information in that update query that you're going to run, and make sure, and it'll pull out the columns that were affected by the actual update. All right. So just to point out, in the Object Explorer, and this can be confusing, because in Object Explorer, the only place where you will find the trigger stuff is underneath the table name. Remember, this trigger is associated with the person.person table. So if you expand that table in the Object Explorer, you will see a triggers folder. And you can see that in my Object Explorer, there's this TRG updated columns. And there's a system trigger in there as well. which is essentially keeps track of everything that's going on in that table anyway. We are actually creating our own user-defined trigger. And yes, we still have a cap on these meetings, but the meeting will continue. It's just that I'll just have to stop and then rejoin if you have any questions. Any questions? Hi, Andrea.
Oh, where is the trigger file?
The file itself, it should be in Loud. Let's take a look.
Is it in the announcements?
No, it's underneath the assignment. Now let's take a quick look just to make sure. If you go into Loud Cloud.
In the assignment that says triggers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Professor?
Yes, go ahead.
My other professor is actually using Blue Jeans instead of this.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with Zoom. Well, because I've already created all the lectures in Zoom, so.
Sure.
And we do have a full license. It's just that I haven't been able to get a hold of our rep to extend the version that I'm using. So.
Gotcha.
It's not a big deal because I'm not planning on lecturing more than 20, 30 minutes anyway.
Cool.
So let me quickly share this just to show you. So in Loud Cloud, under the assignment, there is a file, this sym400 RS SQL triggers doc. This is where the triggers code is located. So if you open up that doc, you'll see, and I can stop sharing that and share the document. So this is the document, the SQL. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait, not anymore.
Whoops. Hold on. Let me do that again. Yeah, here's the document.
Okay.
It has that code in there and the instructions. So make sure you go through all the instructions, and obviously you can copy and paste the code into your SSMS, and then you have to make some edits. And if there are questions about the edits, because it may not be completely obvious what you need to add. Well, it should be completely obvious, but it may not be totally obvious, because if you try and run this, obviously you'll get a mistake. All right, any questions? And that's the triggers assignment.
Yeah, I have a question. It's
Yes.
Courtney.
Courtney.
Hi. So do you want us to post the screenshots in this document that you have pulled up right now, or a separate one?
You can do either or.
Okay. And then also, you said Thursday are you actually gonna be in SQL showing us how to do it, or wait, what is that class period?
I'm going to, basically on Thursday, I'm going to walk through a very similar.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, got
like
it.
I normally do. And then
Okay, yeah.
you just apply that to this trigger. As a matter of fact, I'm going to use this code and just do something on a different table.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mister, this is Jayla. I have a question.
Go ahead, Jayla.
Do you want the code with the screenshots posted in the same document, or can we just include the screenshots?
Code and, well, you can start with this, obviously with this code here. So I would basically start with this. If you're going to use this document, just start with the code here, and then you're going to make edits to this code, and then screenshots. But yeah, start with this code at the very least. Any other questions? All right, let me see who's all here. Hey, Jai. Ben, Courtney. So who's ZACLA? Is that Zach?
Yeah, Zach Lane.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Andrea, Carlin. All right. So we have almost everyone. I know a couple of people are in transition. And I need to ask, how many of you are either in transition or will be over the next few days, heading back home or wherever? Are you all home or heading that way? Or I know Tim.
I'm home.
Go ahead.
Home.
Home. All right.
My
Okay,
knowledge
good.
of it is staying on campus.
All right. So remember, there are several initiatives out there to make sure that this whole scenario will work, and then obviously the whole idea of social distancing and making it safe for everyone is important. At least the cities here are not in lockdown yet, but just to let you know, the prediction model is that in the next couple of weeks it probably will be. So just be prepared for anything. Once again, to recap what my expectations are, I will generally have a basic lecture on Tuesdays, like this week. I went over the assignments next week. I'll go over some of the other aspects of the topic. I suppose that you should have the assignment done long before the 5th. This assignment is not due until the 5th of April, in 2 weeks. So you have plenty of time to relax and enjoy your time at home, if that's enjoyable. Any lingering questions? Good eats, yeah.
How's it going for you?
Better eats at home, right?
Oh yeah. To repeat someone's question, how's it going for you?
For me, it's quiet. Yeah, I was going on campus for a little bit, but I didn't today. But it's going fine, I suppose. I have 5 classes that I'm teaching. It's a little bit different teaching in this way, which is one of the reasons why I didn't like online teaching. I would much rather see all of you, your bright and shiny faces. But
Yeah.
safety is good. So, but it's going all right. The university well, most universities are in the same boat, but GCU has done a very, very good job of providing resources, et cetera, and listening to our suggestions. So there you go. We're going to make sure that everyone finishes off the semester successfully. That's the whole goal. Now, how many of you are going to change to online learning now?
I have 2 online classes coming up this summer.
Yeah, same.
Oh, okay, so you just do it for the summer, just to take a break from all the craziness? The campus.
I think I have one my last semester, which is next year. So.
Okay. Well, it's a good way to get some of those classes if you're motivated enough.
Some days more than others.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Well, it's typical of being a student. It comes with the territory.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a big push to get rid of DQs in the online environment. I know that's the biggest difference. I've always been not an advocate of administering discussion questions. But,
They're annoying.
yeah.
That would be a blessing if they got rid of them.
Yeah.
At least not even the DQs. At least the comments. Like, why is it necessary to respond back like 4 times?
Well, because we think that that's the only way that you will be engaged within the class and with your classmates.
This should be engagement enough.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that premise. I don't think it helps with engagement. It becomes
And then,
Yeah, I know.
since we don't have a lot of